This is the story of a lake and the people that live around her. Friends and neighbors with sometimes similar goals and ideals, and often different perspectives on the value of our natural systems, the status of our life-sustaining ecosystems, and the urgency of our need to act. Their undeniable connection is the water that runs through their community, and the lake that is the centerpiece to their lives.
The history in terms of water quality is a sad story.
It's really discouraging and disturbing to be near the lake, and I know that businesses that benefit from the tourism industry here suffer greatly because nobody wants to come down here.
Lake Champlain is a perfect example of state and federal regulators being captured by the status quo and ignoring important state and federal environmental laws that have been on the books in many cases for decades.
Those blue-green algae blooms, the pictures that you've seen where certain embayments look like chunky pea soup, that's outrageous. That shouldn't exist, and that means, that's an indicator of a gross failure.
Lake Champlain, bordering Vermont, Quebec, and New York, is the 6th largest freshwater lake in the United States. It is the ecological jewel and economic engine of the region. Yet, the lake is in decline. And the early warning sign of this potentially devastating ecological breakdown? Algae blooms.
We've always had algae blooms in Lake Champlain, but beginning about 10 years ago, those algae blooms turned into potentially toxic blue-green algae blooms.
And those blue-green algae blooms can seed blue-green algae blooms, these toxic blooms, elsewhere throughout the lake. So if you get it in one spot, it can tend to spread.
St. Albans Bay was bad this year. There's also been Shelburne Bay had it, off Thompson's Point, and Charlotte had blue-green algae. North Hero also has had several algae blooms. Blue-green algae is a threat everywhere. Everybody's involved in this. Everybody's got to start paying attention.
Over the past few decades, beach closures have become a common event. The lake was included in a travel book titled, "Don't Go There." And deaths of family dogs have been traced to the consumption of blue-green algae.
One beach closure is one beach closure too many. Once enough of us experience a beach closure, or our kids coming out with their skin irritated, or our dog dies because of eating blue-green algae, well then, more people will mobilize. And we live in a state that has this reputation for being an environmental leader. Why is there one dog dying?
The Bay Park, which is right over here behind us, used to average about 55,000 visitors per year, per summer season. And recently, in the past 5 to 6 years, it's averaged 5,000 visitors a year. So you can see what it was like and what it is like now.
I can tell you that Lake Champlain, for myself and my family, it is the place where we go to have fun. It's where my kids want to go swimming. It's the place where my kids couldn't go swimming this year because of a big blue-green algae outbreak down here in Ferrisburg.
The problem in the simplest form is that there's too much fertilizer getting into the lake, and that fertilizer typically is in the form of phosphorus.
So when you add phosphorus to the mix, and too much of it in a water body, and Lake Champlain certainly is one of those water bodies, you set off a whole chain reaction that interferes with the ecology, but it also interferes with human health impacts, potentially in the drinking water supply. 200,000 people drink the water out of Lake Champlain.
We haven't yet decreased or stabilized the increase in the amount of phosphorus that is being contributed to Lake Champlain.
There are 3 major sources of phosphorus pollution to Lake Champlain: polluted stormwater runoff, big dairy operations or dairy farming, and wastewater treatment plants. And there are problems and violations of the Clean Water Act ongoing with each of those types of sources.
The Clean Water Act was passed by the federal government in 1972 to address water quality issues, with an initial emphasis on what are known as point sources, that is, distinct sources such as industrial effluent pipes and municipal sewage.
Let's roll back a little bit to pre-Clean Water Act. When there was a river in Ohio that was burning and would burn sometimes for weeks. The New York Harbor was classified as a conduit for industrial waste. On their little map, it was black.
And Vermont, like every other state in the country, through its state revolving fund, put hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And we poured all this money in treatment plants and really cleaned up the point sources.
Currently, opinions vary on the status and effectiveness of Vermont's wastewater treatment infrastructure.
Clean water has just fallen off the radar. Everybody says, oh, the Clean Water Act, and we've cleaned up the problem. Well, we haven't.
Our most recent data suggests that Vermont wastewater treatment facilities contribute only 3% of the phosphorus pollution that's reaching Lake Champlain.
And I'm really pretty disturbed. I think that we're talking now about perhaps going back to pouring more and more money into wastewater sources, which are only 3% of the problem.
I think there's been an effort to minimize the importance of wastewater treatment plant discharges into Lake Champlain. Say, really, it's only 10% of the problem or 5% of the problem. But that's very misleading, because the phosphorus that comes out of a sewer pipe, out of a wastewater treatment plant, is already mixed into the water. It's dissolved phosphorus. A plant, an algae bloom, can be fueled by that immediately, whereas a lot of the other phosphorus that's going into the lake is bound up in sediments. It would need to be dissolved. It's not bioavailable right away. So that 10% is like the atom bomb of phosphorus.
And that's the other challenge, of course, is that all that infrastructure we built 25, 30 years ago all needs to be rebuilt at some point. But you know, it's big money. I mean, and that's one of the questions also we have to ask is, you know, what do we want in terms of water quality, and how are we going to pay for it? How much are we prepared to buy? Do we want the Cadillac or the Cavalier? Getting
At the local level, increases in property tax in order to be able to deal with clean water, very, very difficult. Here at the State House, getting increased dollars to deal with clean water, very, very difficult. And the political will to enforce existing law is very, very difficult.
The city of Montpelier, for example, knows, and they're $750,000, $1 million, somewhere in that neighborhood, behind in maintenance and upgrades. So what does that mean to folks like me who live downstream from Montpelier? Literally, it means when they have a sewer main break, like they did recently, that 500,000 gallons of raw sewage, at a minimum, kind of like the Gulf oil spill, nobody's really sure how much came out, all wound up in my town, in the lake, off my shore.
I think the state does bear responsibility for improving wastewater treatment plants. I think the state needs to work with the federal government.
At the federal level, I don't mean to politicize this, but we have two wars spending $1 billion a month. It's in that range, maybe more, that if some of that money could be put towards environmental stewardship, we could take care of some of these problems.
You can literally, in a rainstorm, watch the manure next to the barn where it's spilled next to the spreader, go right into the ditch on the side of the road, and then get conveyed right into the local creek, 200 feet down the road, go right in the river, and then go right into the lake. You can literally pinpoint where those nutrients are entering the river, making it unswimmable throughout the summer.
The regulations regarding agriculture are clearly inadequate, and in addition, the model of agriculture here, of dairy farming here, is really inconsistent with a clean lake.
Vermont dairies of the sort of the old model, the big, what they call input intensive operations that also rely on large herd sizes, large production levels, and a lot of capital investment. Those farms are not competing successfully in the global marketplace.
The model is more cows, more corn, more debt. So every time they get into trouble, we're adding cows, we're adding corn, and we're putting more land into production.
There's obviously a lot of erosion that can occur from about this time of year in the fall when the corn crop is taken off and before new vegetation comes up in the spring. Soil is sitting completely exposed for upwards of 6 months, and we believe that to be one of the most significant sources of phosphorus from the ag setting.
I think what's happening in Vermont right now is that there's a lot of feed being imported because either there's not enough crops, but most likely there are too many cows. So you need to import feed. The manure stays and is spread, and when you have too much to spread, sure enough, it will leach to the lake.
In the course of 1 week this summer, a particular farmer spread 1.2 million gallons of manure in 1 week on a field that is fairly close by, that sits on a peninsula. And it is just a industrialized waste reduction removal system.
So you need to come to a watershed phosphorus balance, a neutral balance, where for every truckload of feed coming in, you need a truckload of manure to go out. Not the same truck, by the way. Use a different truck.
Agriculture is an important part of Vermont's history, and it's an important part of our landscape aesthetic. And so while the environmental interests are pushing us in one direction, there are also other interests that say, but we like the way things look. The green farm fields and the red barns and the cows out on grass. And admittedly, some of our challenges are that we've moved away from that a little bit, that we have cows in barns and fields of corn.
Listen to any politician that's running for office. They will talk about saving the farms and supporting the farms. And they are all playing on this mythology, I like to call it the mythology of dairy in Vermont.
Agriculture is 1.5% of our gross state product, employs less than 3% of our population.
If you're not a blood relative of the person who owns the farm, there are no good jobs on the farm, all right? There ain't any.
The messengers will get attacked for being anti-agriculture. We're not anti-agriculture, we're anti-pollution.
Milk is a commodity. What does that mean? It means whether you produce it for $10 or whether you produce it for $6, you still get the same price.
In Vermont, in 2009, we saw subsidies on the order of $25 million. These payments to subsidize a commodity production far outpace money that's spent on any funds at all that are tied to environmental performance of our dairy farms.
You're up against a huge problem with the commodity system here. And that drives farmers to try and find the cheapest way to solve their problems. That means they have 25 things to do that day. In their mind, one of it is making sure that their nutrient management is handled effectively.
What we need to focus on is how do we get a better price for our product. That's the big issue. We're not fairly compensated for what we're doing. And we don't like to be subsidized to make that happen. I mean, when you get up in the morning, and I talk to a lot of my neighbors, they get up at 4 o'clock and they work until dark and they borrow money to do that. It's pretty hard to get motivated to start looking at a potential water quality issue when you can't even feed your kids.
Part of where Vermont has failed those farms is in giving them the impression that they can continue to operate with a subsidy in the form of pollution, allowing them to pollute the waters of the state, to deplete our soil resources, to farm right up to the edge of rivers and destroy riparian corridors, that's okay in some way, and it's not.
So what is Vermont doing to regulate the flow of phosphorus into Lake Champlain?
I call it the $100 million question. So over the last 7 years, we've invested upwards of $100 million between state and federal resources. Clean and Clear is a broad-based water quality initiative. We have grant funds that we put out each year in an effort to help support good projects to improve water quality. The fact of the matter is that there's still algae blooms, and I know that really it's frustrating to people. It's frustrating to the folks here at the agency as well.
There are a lot of things that we're doing that really have very little to do with reducing pollution going down to Lake Champlain. They make us feel good, but they're not really addressing the problem. We know there are some places across the landscape that produce more runoff than others simply because of where they are, the kind of soils they have, the way the land is being used. And if we targeted those places, we could make a lot of progress faster.
One of the things that the legislature did a few years ago was to ask for a program audit of the Clean and Clear program. We asked for that audit because we wanted to know that those millions of dollars were being used effectively. And what we found was that they weren't. We found that the program was disconnected. We found that the goals were not set and the standards not set adequately, and that places like agriculture and land use, urban development, weren't targeted appropriately for the help that they needed.
Generally speaking, we've not seen dramatic reductions in non-point sources in 8 years. But I can tell you that I would have been very surprised if we had seen that rapid of a response in the lakes or in the rivers. The kinds of things that we have to do to reduce non-point sources of phosphorus take time.
I guess my summary of the audit would be that it found our technical programs to be robust, but that our ability to measure results was a challenge for the program and something that needed to be addressed.
Clean and Clear, or Julie Moore, who's the head of Clean and Clear, reports to both the Ag Department and Agency of Natural Resources.
You can't ask someone who has a vested interest in improving and enlarging the dairy business in Vermont to regulate and enforce dairy farmers who aren't complying with the expectations set forth by the Agency of Natural Resources.
I've certainly heard that expression that having the Ag Agency regulate farms is like the fox guarding the hen house. I think the challenge there is there's also the technical expertise at the Agency of Agriculture to know how to deal with the challenges that are on those farms.
The Agency of Natural Resources say, you know, we're going to regulate this industry, the paper industry, the tanning industry, we're going to regulate IBM. Oh, but when it comes to agriculture, we will have no technical experts. All our technical experts will work for the Ag Department. Inspections, not so much. We'll inspect IBM, we'll inspect the paper mill, we'll inspect Ag. Could you guys inspect your Ag yourself for any problems?
Usually we just regulate more traditionally, where we say, in order to operate, you are required to do the following. And I think farmers, dairy farmers in particular, because they're suffering from horrendous milk prices and costs, a lot of high fixed costs, will argue, I just can't afford to do that.
While I appreciate cooperative programs, I appreciate education, I appreciate how that all works, somehow if things are too voluntary and too cooperative, the end point of clean water never arrives.
Stormwater rushes over buildings and streets, sidewalks and parking lots. Once absorbed into natural landscapes, stormwater now races over covered surfaces and pours into the lake.
That water is incredibly powerful. It blows streams apart. When you blow a stream apart, you ruin its ecosystem, you tear the banks down, you put those muddy runs into the stream, you remove rock cobble that serves as the basis for the ecosystem up here, the aquatic ecosystem, and you replace it with a pile of muck.
The water in Lake Champlain is stormwater. People attribute the phosphorus problem in the lake, particularly in St. Albans Bay and Missisquoi Bay, solely to the agricultural landscape. There's been studies that have shown that acre for acre, urban areas can generate just as much phosphorus.
Are we picking up after our pets? Are we using fertilizer when we don't need to fertilize? Are we taking care in terms of how we structure our land? And that's sort of the baseline. There's a role everyone needs to play in reducing their own phosphorus footprint, if you will. But a lot of the things that need attention are things that are really the responsibility of governments to take care of.
We haven't had the political will to do regional planning. Everything is done piecemeal. One house, one new road, one new mall, one new store at a time, without any kind of collective vision of how we want to develop our watersheds.
I think you really need to have a strong enforcement of permits. You need to have permits that make sense and that people can comply with and carry out, and you need to have education. And I feel like we're not doing really well with any of those right now.
Just like people in Burlington now think about where their food's coming from, they buy local and so on and so forth. I would like for them and for developers to have stormwater be part of the conversation when they're building or when they're redeveloping.
Stormwater, agricultural runoff, and aging municipal water treatment facilities. All of these sources are contributing to phosphorus problems in Lake Champlain. The sum of these forces are quantified in what's called the total maximum daily load.
The total maximum daily load under the Clean Water Act is the minimum water quality you need in order to get that water body in compliance with federal and state water quality standards. Doesn't mean it's great. It means it's met minimum requirements. For phosphorus, we aren't there.
EPA has the obligation to approve or disapprove the pollution budgets or total maximum daily loads for any type of pollutant that the states come up with, and really has never gone back.
The TMDL has a number of 427 metric tons. That's how much phosphorus pollution the lake should be able to accommodate without the adverse effects. Currently, depending on how much it rains, when that rain occurs, the load is anywhere from 600 to as high as 1,200 metric tons a year. So obviously we're quite a ways away from the target.
The Environmental Protection Agency may take away the state's control of the Clean Water Act. We will be the first state that has their TMDL opened up and given a second look.
The water quality in Lake Champlain is on a steady decline, yet individual solutions exist if we choose to embrace them. Biological wastewater treatment systems treat water before it re-enters the landscape, and green architectural design could set the stage for broad implementation of stormwater solutions. There are also many examples of diversified sustainable agriculture. Abe Collins is finding success raising cattle, but he wouldn't simply call himself a beef farmer.
I'm a grazer and I'm a soil builder, but I think the biggest thing I'm producing is knowledge. And the real value we're producing is this topsoil under our feet that wasn't there a few years ago.
The USDA claims it takes 1,000 years to grow an inch of topsoil. Through subsoil aeration and grazing strategies, Abe has seen an increase of 8 to 10 inches of topsoil over the past several years.
There's 18 inches of topsoil here, and where we haven't done this one additional treatment, but we've been consistent with the grazing, we have more typically 8 inches. That's a big difference. That would mean a lot of benefit for the infiltration, percolation, purification of water.
It seems that the current Vermont dairy model is economically obsolete. To ensure an agricultural future, we must consider what we actually want from farmers and adjust our economic systems accordingly.
If wheat prices go through the roof, you're going to see a lot more farmers growing wheat. Farmers will respond to the opportunity to make more money by doing something like growing 6 or 8 inches of topsoil, which is addressing climate change and water quality and agricultural production minus inputs. So I am a big believer in markets for environmental services and people in the city understanding that the long-term security and prosperity of their place actually comes from the health of the watershed and fundamentally the health of the soil.
Come on, ducks.
Another great example of Vermont's future farmer is Ben Falk. Ben describes how the landscape of Vermont may look very different in our sustainable future.
Look around the world, anywhere where people have inhabited a hilly landscape for more than a few hundred years, for millennia in places, they've terraced and made the landscape into paddies and terraces and swales. The farming system here we're focused on is necessarily rooted in a diversity of planting systems and also a high diversity of ways in which those plants and animals are farmed. If any of our nutrients are washing off our site into the Mad River and then into Lake Champlain, that's just a total waste for us. Those nutrients are really valuable. We need them to grow our plants, to produce good pasture forages, to build soil. All of this is scalable across the landscape. So rice, for instance, may be a great example of capturing nutrients that are flowing off of a moderate to large-sized dairy farm. Rice is simply an edible stormwater detention basin. Our system's incredibly simplified right now because energy is so cheap and we don't value ecosystem services. The farmer of the future is capitalizing on this incredible diversity and ways of harnessing the nutrients and cycling the nutrients available in a site, which takes diversity. It's not monoculture farming. It's not just growing corn and hay to turn into milk. It's only small-scale, sophisticated farmers and homesteaders that are seeing these systems and are the early adopters of them.
Vermont has long been known for innovative design solutions, but the scale of this problem is enormous. Our current model has exceeded the ecological limits. Lake Champlain is running out of time. The preservation of our soil, streams, and lakes are not just the fleeting passion of a whimsical few, but the foundation of our survival. There is a point where these ecosystems become unrecoverable, and advocates are awakening an apathetic public.
Some of the people don't even know this has been stolen from them. They've never been here. They don't know that somebody took this from them. And we're trying to get that voice heard by our legislators.
The lake's getting worse. It's not getting cleaned up. No matter how many reports we write, how much paper we generate, there's a breakdown. There's a problem between the words and the action.
If we speak to people on the terms that they understand, as boaters, as anglers, as canoeists, as kayakers, well, none of us want to do those things in a polluted lake.
In my experience, the way pollution goes down in a water body is comprehensive, effectively implemented regulatory programs based on the science. But it's whether or not society wants to put the human and fiscal resources into making it happen.